Okay. We are going to continue to learn halachas of Sukkah. We started lots of the halachas that were pertaining to before Sukkos, but a lot of these halachas, in spite of the fact that we needed to know them before, but they apply now as well, since we're in the middle of Sukkos and the chiyuvim of Sukkos still apply. And again, we ask that for anybody that wants to talk, this next door or outside, but please do not talk while we're in here. Hagvarim migil shleishasa ve'elach chayavim b'mitzvah sukkah me'atera. Anybody that's 13 and older has an obligation to be in a sukkah. So we're talking about men, boys, 13 and older, have an obligation to be in the sukkah. That's bar mitzvah and over. A mitzvah chinuch, and then there's a mitzvah of chinuch. The mitzvah of chinuch is not necessarily a mitzvah on the child, but it's a mitzvah on the father. This is a mitzvah that the father, the parent, has to be mechanech his child. So mitzvah chinuch chayiv ha'av lechanech es yiladav migil sheish ve'elef. The mitzvah of chinuch, which is an obligation on the parent, not on the child, it's an obligation on the parent, that from the age of 6 and over, the obligation is to train the child to learn about until bar mitzvah. Then it becomes their own chiyuv. That's why you say baruch shepatrani at bar mitzvah. Then you try to do what you can not to affect them in a negative way. That's maybe perhaps a bigger challenge than otherwise. If a and there are times when the child is even obligated, or the parent is really obligated to be mechanech them even younger than 6. But as a rule, it's from 6 and over. So it really depends on the child, it depends on their capability of understanding, and as is brought down in many halachas, that for each halacha, it really depends on how much they have an understanding of what the mitzvah is really all about. We talk about, for example, fasting on Tishrei B'Av. Do they have an understanding of the churban of the Beis Hamikdash and how this affects Klal Yisroel and how it affects what a person should do or shouldn't do? And similarly, so when you talk about a mitzvah the chiyuv of Sukkos, and why we have to, the kavanas that come along with the chiyuv of Sukkah, is it something that the child can relate to at this point or not? So it's really all dependent on each individual specifically. Hanoshim peturis mitzvah yeshiva b'sukkah. Noshim, women, are pater from the mitzvah. So women are pater from the mitzvah of Sukkah. Mipnei shezuhu mitzvah sasei shazman grama. Women are potter because it's a mitzvah sasei shazman grama. It's time bound, and a mitzvah sasei shazman grama noshim peturais. So therefore, they don't have the obligation of sitting in a sukkah. Ella she'im hein roitzeis hein yechelis lechol b'sukkah. However, if they want, they could. They have the ability to, if they want to. It's like every other mitzvah sasei. Even if it's as Asman Grama, women have the right to choose to fulfill it nevertheless. So if they want to, they have the right to be able to fulfill this mitzvah nevertheless. To the extent even that although they don't have to, they have no chiyuv, but if they've accepted it upon themselves, then they even have the right to make a bracha over it. That doesn't mean that you can make a bracha for them, but it means that they can make the bracha. It's similar to what we talk about the mitzvah Tkiya Shofar. They could accept upon themselves to be obligated with Tkiya Shofar. They take it upon, they don't have to, but they can accept it upon themselves. They don't have to. If they want to, they can, to the extent that they can even make a bracha they can be yoitza with whoever's making the bracha, or make a bracha by themselves. But at the same time, somebody who already heard it, a man that already heard Tkiya Shofar, was yoitza with the bracha, shouldn't make the bracha just for a woman because she is potter from the mitzvah. So just because she took it upon herself doesn't mean that you could be making the bracha for her. Yes. That who gets to make a bracha? Because the whole concept of a bracha is something that the Chachamim were misakin. So the Chachamim were misakin that although they don't have a chiyuv, they can take it upon themselves, and it becomes like a chiyuv for them from the perspective of that they can even make a bracha. But again, not to the extent that a man could be meitzah her with the bracha if he already made the bracha for himself. It becomes, they get schar for having fulfilled the mitzvah, but it's something they've taken upon themselves. They're not obligated to do it. But to the chiddush is that even so, the Chachamim say that we established the concept of brachas, so we allow for you, if you take it upon yourself, that you can make a bracha on it as well. And here's another interesting halacha, which is not everybody's familiar with this halacha, although, again, it's a question of how we, in practice, actually follow through with this halacha. But listen to this halacha. And this is halacha based on Shulchan Aruch. Halacha is Mishi Higia b'mahalach Chag HaSukkos l'makom she'ein bo yishuv klal. If a person arrives in a place, he's in the middle of a midbar. Nobody lives there. There's no settlement here. Nobody lives in this area. So Higia l'makom she'ein bo yishuv klal. There's no settlement there. So the halacha is halacha in Shulchan Aruch. Ein tzarich l'troyach livnei sham sukkah k'dei lecha l'sudasi. He's not obligated to build a sukkah there. Because because the sukkah is like a dira, like a permanent home, and just as person doesn't create a settlement, doesn't create a home in a place where people don't live, in the middle of the forest, in the middle of a desert, people don't live, and just like you don't build a permanent home there, similarly, so you don't build a temporary home in a place like that. So it's, again, the concept that a person would not build a home over there. And since you wouldn't build a permanent home, you also have no chiyuv al pidin to build a temporary home, to build a sukkah there. So what does this mean in a practical sense? How would you apply this in a practical way? Anybody have any thoughts? If you learned the halacha like this, so you can say if I'm middle of the forest, nobody lives here, so I'll be in. I don't have to build a sukkah. Okay, good. How else, in a more practical way, could you relate to this? So the answer is: what about if you're flying? You're on a plane. Nobody lives in a plane, And the question becomes, what do I do if I'm taking a trip to Australia and it's a 21-hour trip? Am I mechuyev al pidin to fast? I can't build a sukkah in a plane. You build a sukkah in a plane, you'll need a sukkah. It's impossible to build a sukkah in a plane. You don't make a yishuv in a plane. I mean, unless they say that the Air Force number 1, they can it can be in the air for who knows how long. For weeks and months without needing to come down. But as a rule, planes do not have to. Planes are places that people don't live in it. They stay there for a couple of hours and whatever the amount of time, and then so al pidin lahalocha. It would seem that it's not. Somebody asks a shaila, calls up his rov, what should I do? I'm flying. I can't. So the halacha is al pidin that he really doesn't need a sukkah, just like the halacha in Shulchan Aruch says that if you're in a place where there's no homes, there's no yishuv, so you don't build a permanent home, so you don't have to build a temporary home. Similarly, so you don't build a permanent home in an airplane, you don't build a temporary home, so it would be potter from a sukkah. What's that? Well, is he allowed? So again, it's not a question, is he allowed? The question is, if for whatever reason he has no choice now, he has to. Again, we're not talking about is he allowed or not. The question is right now, does he have a chiyuv? Does he have a chiyuv or not? I mean, he doesn't have. So if it's the first day of Yom Tov when there's a chiyuv that you have to eat in the sukkah, a whole Yom Tov, there's no chiyuv to eat in the sukkah. If you're eating, you have to be in the sukkah. But what if you're chalamoid? You don't have a chiyuv to eat a gzayis in the sukkah. So the question becomes again, so under these circumstances, so al pidin, you wouldn't have to make a sukkah. The question would become though, Sidim, we're so careful that we don't even drink outside of the sukkah. We don't take anything outside of the sukkah. How would we relate to a circumstance like this? So obviously, again, here's what you're saying comes into the picture. Maybe al pidin you don't have to, but at the same time, you don't want to because it's a mitzvah and there's so much that can be accomplished and there's so much that you could be accomplishing in the sukkah during this period of time, whether it's eating or drinking or even a little bit, even amashu, whatever it happens to be, where al pidin it's potter, but we do it as sidim. We are zohid not to even take a little bit of a drink where al pidin you're allowed to. So obviously from that perspective, we would be careful from that perspective and not look for that heter and say, there's a heter, you don't have to go to sukkah. But al pidin, the reality is that somebody who is looking for a heter or who for some reason needs to go somewhere and there's no alternative, he has no choice and he has to go. So al pidin, he is under these circumstances potter from a sukkah. Well, that's not a sukkah. So you can't build a sukkah. In other words, that's the reality. You can't build a sukkah there. So you can't build a sukkah. So now the question is, you can't build. So is that a reason that you're allowed to eat in a place without a sukkah? So the answer is, in these circumstances where you can't build a sukkah, you also can't build a regular home. So if it's a place that's not a yishuv, where you don't build regular homes, you're also not required to make achilas a bayis aray. Well, it may not be the same circumstance because there are homes there. There are people that live around there. So there it's a different situation because he's in jail and there's nothing you can do about it. But it's not the same where there's no chiyuv because, what's that? So again, if you can't, so einus rachmana patri. No, it's not considered a place that you can't have a sukkah. It's considered a place that you have no choice in the matter. There's nothing you can do about it. Not that you don't need to do something about it. In other words, if you were told that if you if you go out of we'll let you go out of your room and eat in the sukkah, but then you have no days off. So the question is, do you need to do that or not? And the answer is yes, because you have a chiyuv of sukkah. If you're in an airplane, there's no chiyuv of sukkah there. So again, you have to think about what the implications are and what it means in terms of the practical application of this particular halacha. And then again, having said all of that, the question is, how careful are we with sukkah? And talking about that, there's also the halacha that we talked about earlier. That's about the concept of sleeping in the sukkah. So at the same time that the concept of sleeping in the sukkah, from one perspective, that is a chiyuv. It's perhaps to an extent more of a chiyuv than certainly going into the sukkah to drink in the sukkah. There would be, on the one hand, we're careful to not even drink outside of the sukkah, but sleeping, we don't sleep in the sukkah. If you look in the halacha, sleeping in the sukkah is much more for greater chiyuv. You're obligating yourself to go drinking in the sukkah. Certainly, you should obligate yourself to go sleep in the sukkah. But at the same time, based on what we've been taught, what the Rabbi have taught us, what Sikha that the Rabbi discusses about the issue of sleeping in the sukkah and why we don't sleep in the sukkah, from our perspective, in spite of the fact that al pi din there may be a chiyuv, we have this obligation that we should be sleeping in the sukkah, but we don't. And the way the Rebbe explains this from the perspective of the tremendous giluyim, the revelations that exist, and how can we be sleeping in the sukkah when there's tremendous revelations? And the Rebbe asks, what about those? What about us? We don't feel any revelations. So there the Rebbe says that this in itself is a problem because we're so concerned to the extent that we can sleep in a sukkah and not even feel those revelations. That's even more concerning, more of a hamitztayr poter min sukkah. So whichever way you look at it, there is the halacha b'poel. When you open a Shulchan Aruch and you learn what the halacha tells you the way people do, and then when you learn the deeper aspect and the implications of it and what we need to follow and how we need to follow it, sometimes it doesn't always work hand in hand, and we do sometimes things that even though al pi din you may not need to do, such as the fact that even though we're quote unquote mitzvah, whether it's in the middle of a rain, where al pi din you don't have to be in the sukkah. At the same time, our perspective is even if it's raining, we're in the sukkah, and very simply because from our perspective, recognizing how important being in the sukkah is, what are we mitzvah because we're getting a little bit wet? So the reality is we're not mitzvah. So somebody will say, what do you mean you're not mitzvah? You are mitzvah, so stay out of the sukkah. So again, the question really becomes, and here's where we see where if you just learn what's referred to as the Turkana halacha, you just look at the halacha as is, sometimes if you don't look at the deeper aspect and the meaning of what it's all about, we may end up needing to act as a Jew a little bit differently than just looking at the simple halacha, at the practical halacha that as it's stated in Shulchan Aruch, when you really learn the halacha properly and you understand the reasons of it and the meaning behind it, particularly as it comes to the mitzvah of sukkah, because with there it says that the kavanas that you have to have, although generally we say you don't have to have any kavanas when you do a mitzvah, you can do the mitzvah, just do it. When it comes to sukkah, you have to have special kavanas. So we see that it's associated with deeper things, deeper concepts, and as a result of that, as chassidim, we know the things that we need to do, that we ought to do, that we're responsible to do. And when we do it, we know we have fulfilled the mitzvah in its best possible way, as the Rabbi have taught us. What time did we say? 7:20. Oh, a minute.